Sweet. Okay. Hey, Derbycon. So fucking excited. Okay, so there's a lot of content and a lot of literally moving parts here. So awesome. Let's make it count. So hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Like really excited to be here. I'm going to start with the obligatory, like, who am I stuff. I'm going to go past that real quick. So my name is Amit Serper, and if you're asking, hey, dude, that's a pretty weird name. What's up with that? And that's because I'm from here originally, and that's Tel Aviv, Israel. And last year I moved to the US. And I moved to Boston. So from here to here, quite an experience. Great success. Last year, my wife slipped in snow, broke her hand. I'm okay. It was nice. $20,000 hospital bills. Holy shit, people. Like 3 months ago, I got internet famous for like 2 days for doing this. I fucking hated that. That was the NotPetya ransomware attack, and I guess I found like some sort of a way to stop it, and journalists 24/7, that wasn't fun. Yeah, so as I said, my name is Amit, and I do security research for a cool company called Cybereason. Before that, I've been with Cybereason for the past 3 years, started in Israel and then moved to the HQ in Boston here last year, as I said. Before that, I was at a certain nation-state actor, doing nation-state sort of things for 9 years. And I usually don't talk about, like, personal stuff or my opinions about things, but especially after what happened with Equifax, and their CISO and his certs. So I never graduated high school. I don't have a college degree, and I don't have any certs. And thank you. And this whole thing is bullshit. It's a fucking piece of paper. It doesn't matter what you studied. It's only about what you're doing. I reverse engineer embedded stuff for fun. It's a weird hobby, and I owe it all to Zachary Cutlip and Craig Hefner. These are their Twitter handles, and I saw them speak at DEF CON several years ago. I think it was 2012, and that like completely changed my focus and my weird hobbies. So I owe everything here to them and pretty much where I am in my career. So they're really awesome. Also, I'm on Twitter, and that's like the best way to contact me and reach out. I love talking to people, so if you're interested, that's my Twitter handle. Okay, so what's on the agenda? Let's go. We're going to do a quick device overview of this piece of shit right here, the camera. That's right there. We're going to map the attack surface of this piece of shit right there, the camera. We're going to do some vulnerability research of this piece of shit right there, the camera. And we're going to exploit this piece of shit right there, the camera. And we're going to have a bunch of demos, hopefully. So I'm going to start by telling you a story. So this is my friend Yoav. He also works at Cybereason. He's one of the most brilliant and smartest people I've ever met. He's leading our Windows security research and development team. Super fucking smart guy. And we were chilling at his house one day. That was when I still lived in Israel, and we were looking for something to hack. And he had this camera behind his desk, his desk. And I was kind of interested, and we started like fucking around with it. So let's talk about it. So what it is, it's actually a cloud IP security camera, and I need everyone to remember the word cloud, because it's what it's all about. And it's really shitty. Like, when you hold, it's like a cheap plastic, like hardly any branding on it. It feels really cheap when you log into it and you see the UI, and I'll show you that. It looks really cheap, and everything about this screamed hack me. So, we did. I forgot to mention, this research, it was the work of Yoav and myself. Everything I'm saying, he was involved too. It's like a 50-50 effort. So let's do a quick overview. Hold on. Yeah. The banana is the best part in this GIF. So what is this thing that we're talking about? So this cloud IP camera is basically running on a generic ARM SoC, system on a chip. So this is an ARM architecture. It's running its own brute version of Linux that's using BusyBox. Now, if you don't know what BusyBox is, it's basically an environment that allows you, it's a basic set of Unix tools. It's like you have everything you need there to run a small embedded Linux environment. And the thing about BusyBox is it's basically one binary, one statically linked multi-call binary that sits in /bin on your file system, and everything is sim-linked into it. So, for example, I'll zoom in for you guys. Can you see it? Awesome. So, like, let's say you want to call sysctl, right? It's a standard Linux command. Sysctl is sim-linked into /bin/busybox, and then BusyBox runs, and it sees that you called sysctl in argv0, and it says, okay, you called sysctl, so here I'll give you the sysctl part of the binary. So it's just one binary that sits on your system. This is very, very important to remember. I'll get back to it. Let's get back to the camera itself. So it runs, it's a brand new device. Like, you get those stuff, you can get them like brand new. I bought 40 of them, I'll talk about that too. And like, they're brand new devices, they're running a bunch of really, really, really outdated code. Like, I'm talking about things from 8, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, like super, super old. And the code that was written by the vendor itself is also really, really, really shitty. And they followed, the idea of, I'll just write a bunch of code and I'll hit F5 and it'll compile, or I'll write make and it'll compile. And if it compiles, it's fine. Fuck warnings, fuck security, like, fuck that. But it's like the plague. Those things are the plague, and it's never okay. If something just compiles, just, it's not okay. You need to, put some security in mind. The camera also has something that's called a PPPP protocol. And it's used to circumvent pesky NAT situations. So, like, if you don't want to forward ports and stuff, because that thing sits behind your NAT router. Now, PPPP stands for, as you can guess, point-to-point-to-point-to-point protocol, the third point being probably the Chinese. And I'm not going to cover that at all, because that's a talk on its own, but I'll just go briefly into it. Every camera has on its bottom, I'm not going to lift it up because it's going to stop working, because it's a piece of shit. It has like a QR code, and you use that QR code. You scan that QR code with their horrible iOS or Android app. You just scan the QR code, and that protocol, it basically creates a tunnel from your phone, wherever you are in the world, that tunnels all the way back to the company, the Chinese company, and then they build a tunnel that goes straight into your house, or your business, or your home, or your office, or your boat. And you don't really need to mess with the router and forward ports because of that protocol. Now, this is a very simple protocol. It's like, it's really ugly. It's just wrapping all the HTTP communication. We took this apart too, and like, everything I'm going to talk to you about and going to show you, going to be like, you can do it with the PPPPP protocol. Oh, fuck me sideways. Good choice. Why not both? Oh, this is hot. Wait, is this like spicy? Yeah. Fuck that. Thanks for coming out. Sure, man. Yeah, take care. It's like I'm 15 again. We start drink early in Israel. It's not that bad. Okay, sorry, ADHD. Okay, so this company, camera, is made by a company called V-Star Cam, and they also sell it as a white label to other vendors. Now, one cool thing about V-Star Cam is that they wrote this on their website. I don't know what you're, like, I don't know. And as I said, they have horrible apps which are vulnerable too, but I'm not a mobile guy, so I don't care. And the camera runs a web server that's called Go Ahead Web Server. Now, show of hands, anybody here knows that web server? Okay, cool. Got some people. And also, a web interface. This is just a clusterfuck of elementary school level code that was mashed together and somehow managed to compile. Now, these cameras are really, really, really popular. I managed to craft a Shodan dork that gave me like 800,000 results. I got 1 million at one point. So, and that's 800,000 root shells. Like, I'm not kidding. It's that bad. Whoa. You can also get them for really, really, really cheap, like on Amazon or eBay or just any store. If you pay more than $35 for that piece of shit, you're being ripped off. I bought 40 of those from different vendors, stores, Amazon, eBay, whatever. They were all vulnerable. So like they had different logos on them and different stuff, and they were all vulnerable. This is just a part of the cameras I got. Let's talk about the web server, because when you do security research on embedded devices, the web server is usually the best way to the best place to start your research, because that's what you interact with the most. So Go Ahead Web Server is actually a product made by a company called Embed This, which is a really clever name when you think about it. And it's basically a web server that's also a very tiny, very small footprint, one single binary, and you have everything you need inside it. Now, if you look at the features, and that's a screenshot from their website, they have all of these standard web server features, as you can see here, and they have something that's called a CGI handler. Now, Go Ahead Web Server is open source, at least parts of it, so it makes it easy to reverse engineer it, and I'll talk about it. And CGI, if you don't know, it stands for Common Gateway Interface. Now, that means that there is code that runs on the camera itself, on the web server side, on the server side, that gets input from the user. So that code could be a binary file, it could be a script, it could be whatever you want, but it takes input from you and executes it on this. Now, this is a really, really bad idea. Like, CGI handlers were really popular in the late 90s, and the 90s are over, so let's not do this ever again. Whatever the CGI functionality does, so that's what the third party, the vendor adds. So as I said, the web server is a product, an off-the-shelf product. You get it, you add some stuff into it, and when you compile it, those features are being compiled into the binary. So if you want to reverse engineer whatever the CGI handler is doing, you can't look at the open source code unless you have it. You need to reverse engineer and disassemble the binary. So back to our story. So what we were actually looking for was remote code execution. I wanted to be able to point my finger at an IP address, hit enter, and get a root shell. But we had one problem, because usually when you do this kind of security research, you need the firmware. Like, you want to reverse engineer something. You want to look at the code that was added to the web server and look for stupid mistakes. But with most vendors, you can just go to, like, D-Link, Linksys, whatever vendor, and they have a download section where you can download the firmware, and then you can unpack the firmware and get the binary, load it into either Pro or whatever what you like to use as a disassembler, and just go nuts. But in this case, since this is such a piece of shit, and they don't really have a website, like you can go to pieceofshit.com/firmware and like look at their FTP server. We had to get the firmware first, and you know what that means? It's hammer time. We literally took a fucking hammer, and seriously. So we broke this thing to expose the board, because again, we wanted to get the firmware. So what we actually did is most of those devices have what's called a UART port, or a serial port, or whatever you want to call it, which is basically that thing right here. What you need to do is to find which headers on the board are the UART port, which is like, which is the voltage, which is the RX, which is the TX, what is the terminal speed, whatever. We did that. I mean, here you can see this is, I have a laser pointer, I think. Yeah. So this is a bus pirate, which I actually don't really like, but that's what we had at the time. And we connected some wires, soldered them to the headers that we found out that they were the UART headers. I'll zoom out. Plugged this thing back into the power, and bam, we started seeing stuff in the terminal, and the thing booted, and we had a root shell. Now, this is not remote code execution yet. This is just fucking around with a hammer. So it's not something I can do to a remote device. Like, I can't break your camera through the internet and connect wires into it, right? So now what? So we wanted to get the files from the camera to our computers so that we could reverse engineer it. Now, the way we did it is we used DD and netcat because whoever made the image was kind enough to compile DD and NC into BusyBox. So since we have a root shell on the camera, we have it connected to our computer, it was just easy as, doing this. I'll zoom in. DD, and then, take the MTD block device, pipe it into netcat, on the other computer is listening to it, and bam, we have the firmware. So, this is pretty cool. Then we just used binwalk, which was written by Craig Hefner, dev TTY-S0, that I've mentioned before, and we had access to the files. Oh god, there's Smirnoff Ice. Oh. And this is binwalk. So if I'll zoom in, you can see that you can, you run binwalk on the file that you just downloaded, and then you can see the sections of it, where is the bootloader, where is the actual file system, etc., etc. So here's what we know after we have the files and after we started looking at them. We know that it's a device that's running Linux kernel version 2.6.24 from January 2008. Brand new device, we just got it. It's running the go-ahead web server, which I already talked about. Parts of the source code are available. It has a lot of poorly written code, a lot of old stuff, a lot of old libraries that are vulnerable as shit. And there is also a file called system-ini in the web root directory that contains the password to the camera in clear fucking text. Now we can't ask for that file because it's password protected. They thought about everything. But since this whole thing is starting to look like a dumpster fire, something has to be vulnerable, right? So let's talk about user-controlled strings or user-controlled input, whatever you want to call it, for a second. So as we all know, when we, the users, are working with a program, we are passing information to it. This is this is the user-controlled strings. And the software then takes the input that was given by us and applies its logic on it. And if at a certain point, we as hackers can take advantage of the programmer's mistake, of some sort of a mistake that the programmer did when he's handling that user-controlled input, it means that we're hackers, and we're good hackers, right? And it means that bad stuff usually happens. So let's start by mapping our attack vectors. So we need to know first, where are there any user-controlled strings? Where do we interact with the code that's running on this piece of crap? And is this code vulnerable? Did someone make a mistake? And if it is vulnerable, how can we exploit it? So let's try to do the first thing. Let's try to log into the admin panel of the camera. So, we just point our web server to this address, port 81 for some reason, and we immediately get a password box. And this asks for our authentication. So whatever we put in here, we control it. So, whoops. I'm telling you, I need a new computer. Okay, so first stop. Wasted all of this time for this. First stop, let's analyze the login process, right? So we got the password box, and we start looking at the code, and it didn't appear to be really easily exploitable. I mean, I managed to overflow it, cause a buffer overflow and cause this thing to crash. But it's debugging and shell coding, and it's hard, and I'm lazy, and it was a Saturday, and I didn't care. And it's hard. I don't want to do hard things. What this code basically did is it took the password and did a simple string comparison to the content of system.ini, which is the file I talked about earlier. If the password you supplied matches, then you can log in. Not interesting. But let's think about this for a moment again. So let's think, what is the first point of contact of a user-controlled string with the web server? And when you think about it, it's actually the web request itself. This fills me with joy, this GIF, by the way, when everything was simple. And so let's talk about HTTP requests for a sec. So this is a really, really, really oversimplified version of an HTTP request. I'm thirsty, so I'm going to do this disgusting thing. Ugh. So when we send an HTTP request, it looks roughly like this, right? We have GET, which is the action. we have the path of the file that we're asking. The path always has to start with / because that's our web root, so that's really important. And then the protocol, so HTTP 1.1, and then 2 carriage returns, and you get what you ask for if everything checks out. Now, if everything checks out, you get an HTTP response called 200 OK, which is basically the server saying, okay, dude, here's your shit. Like, if the file exists, if the permissions are okay, if things check out with your request, you'll get a 200 and OK response with what you ask for. Now, let's go and look at the code that handles that part. So, as I said, parts of Go-Ahead are open source. So we went to GitHub way back, like 10 years ago back, because this is an active, Go-Ahead is an active project, and this thing was really old. So we had to go 10 years back in GitHub and find the code. And we found the code and saw, okay, that looks kind of like what we want to look at. And then as we scrolled down, we saw this thing, which is alarming. So there are a lot of types of HTTP requests, get, post, head, whatever. And those requests have to, conform with the protocol. You can't just send any request you want. It has to be a valid HTTP request. If you send an invalid HTTP request, the server will then send you an error called 400, which is right here. It's called bad HTTP request, right? So if you send something weird, the server will say, I don't know what the fuck you want from me, bad HTTP request. But what's alarming here, what's highlighted here with the arrows, is the server will only send you a 400 error code if your request isn't a get, a post, or a head request. Now, it doesn't matter what's in the request. As long as the request is a get, post, or a head, the server will do anything you want. So, again, let's do a quick recap, because this is where things start to get stupid. And an HTTP request is only considered legit if there is a / at the beginning of it. You can't just request for a file without starting from the start, the point of the beginning, which is your web root, which is /. In the code, it's URL position 7. I don't know why I wrote it. It doesn't really matter. And there is no real exception handling in that web server. So it's like you will only get an HTTP error if your request isn't a post, get, or a head. Again, doesn't matter what's in the request. So, hacker time. So, if we send manually a request like this, get/system.ini, remember, that's the file with the password that's protected by the password. We get this, okay? Now, I'm gonna show you demo number 1. Are you ready? So, demo number 1. So, I'm gonna open a terminal. I'm gonna telnet to the camera, okay? Port 81, I'm gonna do get/system.ini. Can you see this? I can enhance. Is this better? Like this? Sweet. Enhance. So, get system ini http/11, enter. I will get an unauthorized error, right? Because it asks for a password. But remember I told you that the server will take anything you throw at it, as long as it's like one of those 3 types of requests. So what's going to happen if I'll do get system ini without the / http:/11, bam, I'm getting the file. So this is the username, admin, and this is the password, ZAQ XSWCDE, like that thing on the keyboard. Now, I really wanted to impress you with like a really complicated password, and I couldn't. Each time I try to set the password, it won't let me. I was like, what the fuck is going on? I open IDA Pro, I reverse engineer it, and I'm like, what the fuck? The programmer used an or instead of an and, so the password can only be all lowercase, all uppercase, or all numbers. And I'm serious, you ain't seen shit, like, we're just starting. So, yeah. But you guys will say, okay, but like, this is bullshit, so okay. So this is the admin panel, or you can see the camera, you can move it around. It's still not remote code execution. So, I started rummaging and going through the admin panels. First of all, you can see state-of-the-art design, amazing UX, like, fucking high quality, right? And I did what I always do, is whenever I see like this input box, I always type ;reboot into it, and I hit submit. And if the device stopped responding, it means that it actually rebooted. Oh, what's with the... It's so disgusting, the Smirnoff Ice. Oh. And if the device reboots, it means that, I just executed a command in the shell through the web interface. And that means that someone is calling system with user input. Now, in case you don't know what system is, it's a standard C call, which basically looks like this. You call system, you give it a command line, and it's executed by your program. And what they did here is they literally took whatever is in that box, right, and passed it to system, and it was executed. Now, if you're familiar with Linux, if you're managing to reboot a device, it means that you're root. So this is command execution as root. The server is running as root. Why? And I always say this, like I talked about this thing several times, I always said is passing a user control string to system is a bad fucking idea. Like, don't do this. It should never happen. Like, never, 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 ever. And this is exactly why. And it literally means that, nobody cares about command injection. So this is called a command injection vulnerability, and this means that the input that's provided by your user is not being sanitized. Input is literally being directly passed, usually by sprintf, to system, and it's not sanitized for special characters such as the semicolon or the pipe or end or backtick. So if you can, and there's a few more tricks to do that. So if you can, if whenever you see this device, just try typing like backtick reboot backtick or semicolon reboot or whatever, and if it works, then it's a command injection. So let's look at it in IDA Pro for a second. And as we can see, this is the function. So that page is actually it's called send mail. So it's like if the camera detects any sort of like motion or movement in your house, it will send you an email saying, "Hey, I detected some motion in your house," and it sends you that email literally by doing echo, some sort of string, pipe, mailx, which is another binary on the camera, and it's just you can see here. Can you see the pointer? Yeah, here. It literally just takes the string that you wrote in that input box, sends it away. So if you put a semicolon, you basically say, okay, fuck what happened until now, run this. So this is command injection. So yay. So we're almost at demo time. Now, I did this talk before. This is the third time I'm doing this talk, but I have more time. So I said, okay, I'm gonna create a really cool demo because I have code execution, right? It doesn't really matter. And when I did it at other talks, people said, well, yeah, you demoed it, your computer is connected to the camera directly, and you opened the shell on it, but this camera is usually behind a router, so you need to forward ports. The fact that you just opened something on the camera and there's a socket listening, it's cool, but it's not accessible to the outside world. So I said, okay, challenge accepted. So I created this, and by the way, the reason this chart looks like this is because if I put this block here, it looks like a dick. So, and that's, I now understand after a year living in the US that this is offensive. So what I have here is a router, and you can see it here. Wait, what? What? So we can see that there's a router here. And the camera is connected to the router on the LAN side, and this is the address, right? This is the subnet. My machine, which is the attack machine, is actually connected to the WAN side. This is the address, and this is only to simulate, how I'm doing this attack through the internet. And there is also a Raspberry Pi connected, and the Raspberry Pi also connected to the LAN side as to simulate another computer in the network, in the internal network. And what I'm going to show you is actually how I'm not only getting to the camera, but how I'm also getting into the other computer that's on the internal network, because I'm an evil asshole like that. So demo time finally. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using that injection of semicolon reboot, I'm going to use my favorite trick of them all, and I'm going to do semicolon telnet D -P4444-L bin-sh. Now, what this means actually is, so also the folks that created the image were kind enough to create to add a telnet server into BusyBox. So I don't even need to do some shell coding or like really clever stuff. There's a fucking telnet server right here. I just need to start it. So I'm starting it on port 4444. Now the default option of telnet D is to start a process called login. Now login is the process that asks for your user and password when you're like logging into a Unix box. So like I'll show you here on my Mac. Like I'll start a new tab and I'll type login. And it will ask me for my user and password. So I'm going to say, Amit and a wrong password, and it's going to tell me login incorrect. And if I'll use my right password, it will let me in. The problem with using login is that in many cases, just like this case, you don't really know what the username and password, what they are, because you have nothing to do with the image. You didn't create the image. You don't know what's in /etc/passwd or shadow or whatever. So what you can do is use -L, and -L means what process do you want me to run after a connection is initiated. So I say, just run bin-sh, dude. Authentication bypass, number 3. So, demo. Before I start my demo, and this is the kicker, I want to talk to you about a really bad decision that a lot of companies made a few years ago. And I want to talk about UPnP, specifically UPnP IGD, stands for Internet Gateway Device, and this is the RFC. If you really want to read it, it's boring as shit. And UPnP IGD allows software to redirect ports on the router from the WAN side to the LAN side, and using an API like a SOAP-based protocol. It was back when SOAP was cool. And that seems to be like a good idea back at the time. I don't know, just like Brexit or JavaScript or other horrible ideas. And these cameras have UPnP clients on them, right? So if we look at IDA Pro, we see that like there's a certain function that calls UPnP static. And it's using this to forward some ports to the camera for it to work correctly with the Chinese. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? Like you understand what's going to happen. Because this is UPnP static. I can literally forward any fucking port I want. So let's do that for a second. So I wrote an exploit. So I said it yesterday. People said, oh, demo gods, are you ready? I'm an atheist. Oh, by the way, we have some time. So, bonus. I got this router. It was $10 at Micro Center, which is fucking awesome. I'm from Massachusetts, so Micro Center is the shit. And I was like, $10 router, I only need it for a demo. Okay, cool. And then I was bored and I started looking into this. So, by the way, you can, if I'll connect to the router on its web administration port that's opened by default on the WAN side, I can actually get the configuration backup with no authentication and all the passwords are in clear text. So that's a bonus. I told you I have weird hobbies. Okay, so let's use the exploit I wrote, which I called Campone. And what it's... the fuck just happened? Connection refused. Hold on. Is it? I think the camera crashed. Okay. Let's try that again. Oh, snap. Why am I so arrogant? Failed to establish a new connection. Connection refused. I'm going to reboot the camera real quick. Okay. So... Okay. While it reboots, I want to talk to you about some interesting facts, and I'll get back to the demo, hopefully. So, we disclosed all of those vulnerabilities, and got CVEs for them. But after we did, we found out that the / vulnerability I talked about earlier, was already disclosed by a guy called Luigi Oriyama back in 2004. On a different device. It was a printer, if I remember correctly. So that means that this device, that you can still buy, and I emailed the vendor, and I didn't hear anything from them, so you can still buy this device, and it's not a 0-day, it's a 4,745-day, sort of. Nobody cares. So these are the CVEs we got, and Someone took those exploits and created a new botnet that's called Persirai, which is like the new Mirai, I think. And I have nothing to do with this. I did responsible disclosure, which I'm not going to do ever again. And the dude or dudette took the exploits and created a big fucking botnet. I have nothing to do with this. Don't deport me. Okay? Let's see if this thing is working. I checked it like 1,000 times. What the hell? What the hell? So I can do it manually. You know what? I think, let me see if like something happened here, because that's my code and I checked it 1,000 times. Go ahead. I have no idea what happened here. I can do this manually. So what the thing is supposed to do, so as you can see, it got the information leak. It's using the two exploits. It got the information leak, and it's using the password that it just got, and it's logging into the camera, and it's going to that form I showed you before, and it's actually it's running semicolon telnet d blah 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 blah. Just gonna. I know what it is. Oh, fucking macOS. God damn it. I know what it is. It's not my fault. It's macOS. This is so awesome. Where's the proxy setting here? Because I was working with burp on some things. It's here, right? Proxies. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Fuck the demo god. Okay. Sweet. Okay, so what's happening now is it's using the password through the info leak, right? And that's the password right here. It's authenticating using that password. It's going to that form I showed you before. And it's running that command. Now, the way that this works, I said it's a dumpster fire, right? So the way that it works, there's a thread that's just sitting there and like waiting for 30 seconds, a minute for nothing to happen. And then once it's finishes doing nothing, it just runs my command. So here we go. And I'm even nice enough to clean up some residue from the UI. So I'm cleaning up. And now I can connect to port 4444 and get nothing. And why am I getting nothing? Because that port isn't forwarded, right? That's what I talked to you about. So I'm going to do another thing and use another tool I wrote called Campone UPnP, which is going to do the same thing, but instead of running telnet D, it's going to actually run the UPnP C static to tell the router to forward a port to the camera. Now, this is the real kicker here, and I ask all of you, please turn off UPnP on your home routers, because this is really, really dangerous. I just realized when I responsibly disclosed it, someone made a botnet. I just showed something way, way, way more nefarious. So, shit, don't deport me. So as you can see, the UPnP client, I ran the wrong command. I'm going to run it again. I'm sorry. I got stressed because of the last demo not working. So, because that's the second demo. I'm going to forward port 4444 to port 4444 on the inside, right? So I'm going to run it again. So what's going to happen now is the camera is sending a UPnP request to the router, and it's a standard, right? It's a protocol. So it doesn't matter if it's a shitty $10 router or a really expensive Cisco router. If UPnP is turned on, this is going to work. And it's going to send it a request to forward that port, to forward 4444 on the outside to 444 on the inside to this address, which is the IP address of the camera, 0.31, if memory serves. And yeah, and now port 4444 is forwarded, so I can just telnet and get a root shell, as we can see here. So demo number 1, clap. Thank you. Do you realize what just happened? I just took over your router without knowing which router it is, just because UPnP is turned on. Now, what's the Raspberry Pi for? I also have a Raspberry Pi running a web server with a secret, secret stuff, secret documents. And I wanna gain access to it. So I can just use the camera, and I'll run it again just for show. I can use the camera again, to run UPnP and forward port 10,000 on the external side to port 80 on the internal side to 0.100, which is the Raspberry Pi that's running a web server right here. So I already ran it, so I'll save some, I'll save some time. I'll open Chrome, I'll use porn mode, and I'll do 10.0.0.5, port 10,000, and I have access to like the secret page that's sitting on a machine inside a network that no one ever wanted it to be exposed to the outside world. Again, 10.0.0.5, right here is the external address of the router on the internet, right? So I just made the router, and again, works on any router with UPnP turned on. I just made any router to do things it's not supposed to. All because shitty security on one device on your network. So takeaways from this was the second demo, by the way, and the last one. Takeaways from this: don't buy cheap, shitty stuff, and turn UPnP off on your routers. It's really important. It's not needed anymore. Like when Skype came out, Skype really used UPnP, and UPnP was like the shit back then, but it's literally shitty today. So don't use UPnP. You don't really need it. And another thing about UPnP in most routers, you can't really see UPnP ports that are already forwarded. It's just on or off. You can't really see what's happening. So thank you all for coming. I just want to give some shout-outs to my friend from Cybereason and Serialgeist and DeLoreanSec is Justin and Chris right here that really helped and provided moral support. Zach Cutlip and Craig Hefner, which are like awesome. I owe them everything. And Craig Hefner wrote Binwalk, which is fucking amazing. And Vis, if you know him, is really cool. And Patrick Wardle and Jonathan Levin, those people are like, they're like mentors to me, and we all became good friends, and this is what this community is all about. So this is really awesome, and this is what it should be. And I hate egos and fuck egos, and security shouldn't be about egos and who's smart and who has more exploits. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your attention. And thank you, really. I have some time for questions, guys. Yeah, I have like 5-6 minutes for questions if you're interested. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, why did I use UPnP and not create a reverse shell to prove my point? So basically, it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I actually did start I had a demo, I still have it here, a demo with a reverse shell. It works. The reason I did this is because it's two reasons. One, a lot of people still use UPnP, and UPnP is on, and I wanted to show how dangerous it is. And another reason is, in many cases, that Smirnoff Ice, Jesus. Literally 2 sips of this and it destroyed me. And the other reason I'm not using the reverse shell is because, and this is kind of shady, depends on the way to obfuscate where you're coming from. If you want to do this on a mass scale, you can't really use reverse shells. Don't deport me. Yeah.
You mentioned that you found nearly 800,000 of these using the show network. Where are some of the more interesting locations that you can install?
Theoretically. Yeah. So the question was, you found 800,000, almost a million, of those devices. Where are the most interesting devices? So theoretically, people's houses, theoretically, factories, allegedly, sensitive corporations in China, maybe. Like, this is really popular because it could be that shitty model that's like for home use, but it could also be like massive cameras, HD, quality, infrared, weatherproof. Like, it's bad. Another question? Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.